As any organism interacts with the environment, it needs energy. This energy powers all of its life processes. You remember those processes we talked about in Chapter 1. Okay, all those 7 different things that living things do. Think of the systems in your car. You have a fuel system, you have a temperature control system, you have an air intake system. If one system doesn't work, the car does not work efficiently, or maybe not at all. The flow of energy in an ecosystem is critical to the ability or capacity of that ecosystem to sustain life. So as we go through the next 2 sections, we're going to be looking at energy, producers, consumers, and that flow of energy in an ecosystem. So get your papers ready, wide right, skinny left. Remember, on the right side, take notes however you want to take notes, but save that left side for those questions. Okay, see you on the next slide. Okay, here's a news flash for you guys. Producers make food. They produce. Wow, that was really a stretch, wasn't it? Anyways, another name for producers is autotroph. Autotroph is a word that means self-feeding. So they make food for themselves. Another term we use is right there at the top of the page, primary producers. That indicates they were the first producers of all those energy-rich compounds that other organisms later use. Now, let's talk about these producers for a minute. If they are land organisms, they use sunlight as the energy source in the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis means to make from light. Photo, light, synthesize, to make. For a long time, this was one of the necessary ingredients for life, along with water. Okay, we thought that the only way that they could make food was photosynthesis. But then, when we were able to go down to the deepest parts of the ocean, we discovered organisms that were living where there was no light at all. So how do they live if they can't make food? That was kind of a puzzle until we started to study them. Okay, these organisms, with this discovery came the discovery that these organisms use inorganic compounds. Okay, remember, organic compounds have that carbon, hydrogen, carbon-oxygen bond. Well, inorganic compounds don't have that. So they use inorganic compounds like hydrogen sulfide to make the necessary sugars to live in a process called chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis is to make from chemicals. In the diagram, that's going to come up here in just a second. So inorganic, they use hydrogen sulfide. Okay, in the diagram, you see how the chemical reaction for each of these looks. So on the left-hand side, you see photosynthesis. So we have solar energy, energy from the sun, that provides heat. The carbon dioxide and the water react with the heat and they produce a carbohydrate, sugar, and oxygen. Okay, now the carbohydrate is its food. It's a sugar. So if you look on the right, the organisms that undergo chemosynthesis, they use hydrothermal energy. They use heat energy from this volcanic vent deep under the ocean. They take carbon dioxide, which is in the water, and obviously they take the water. But then they use hydrogen sulfide and oxygen that's also in the water, and the heat causes a chemical reaction and it produces a different carbohydrate, okay, CH2O. But notice it still has that 1:1 ratio, CH2O, and then it produces a sulfuric acid. So we have chemosynthesis on the right and photosynthesis on the left. And we'll talk a little bit more about those later on as we go through this whole year. So let's take a look at photosynthesis one more time, because I want you guys to be really, really good at photosynthesis. You guys should be dreaming about photosynthesis. It's so critical to biology. Okay? So photosynthesis uses energy from the sun. It's light energy. When it hits a leaf, it turns to heat energy. And that heat energy breaks the bonds between the carbon and the oxygen and carbon dioxide and the hydrogen and the oxygen in the water, and it just shuffles them all around and it creates a glucose, C6H12O6, and it creates oxygen. But it doesn't, I shouldn't use the word create, it makes, because this isn't a balanced equation. I need to add some other numbers in there because matter's not created, matter's not destroyed. These elements just get rearranged. Okay? So photosynthetic producers, photosynthesis takes hydrogen and oxygen in the form of water, carbon and oxygen in the form of carbon dioxide, breaks them up and makes glucose and oxygen as products. And the plant uses that glucose and it puts oxygen back out into the atmosphere. Plants are the main land autotrophs. Okay, so that's what we have on land. They make we call them plants. In the water, we have algae. And you probably see algae growing in the snake's water dish too. Algae is green. It's undergoing photosynthesis. There's also a photosynthetic bacteria that lives in the water, and it's called cyanobacteria. So it's kind of a bluish green. This is really important, especially in the Houston, Galveston area in salt marshes and tidal flats, because they also make food, but then they also put oxygen back out into the water that they're living in. So cyanobacteria. And we talked about chemosynthesis, places where that sugar is made without any light at all. This is a phenomenon that was just recently discovered, really about the last 30 to 40 years. So for you guys, that's ancient history, but for me, that's recent. And as I said, before we discovered this, we thought light was necessary for life to exist. Well, we've learned light is not necessary for life to exist. Okay, everything that we're finding in the deep ocean is just throwing that idea out the window. There are lots of different kinds of bacteria that live in water, and the bodies of organisms that live in and around these deep sea vents. There's like tube worms and all kinds of really cool things. The bacteria that lives down in this water take in the hydrogen sulfide that gets made, that is coming out, and along with carbon dioxide and water, they produce a simple sugar and then a waste product that's that sulfur compound. So because we don't have plants down here, we have these bacteria, kind of like the cyanobacteria that I just talked about in the last slide, but it's a different kind of bacteria. These bacteria take in the hydrogen sulfide and they mix it with carbon dioxide and the water, and they come up with a sugar and a sulfur compound that is their waste product, and then the other organisms get their food from these little bacteria. Pretty cool. Okay, we've spent a lot of time talking about producers, and that's actually pretty important because without producers we wouldn't be here. Okay, but we are going to take a look at the other organisms, the other type of organism that exists on Earth, and that's the consumers. Okay, now like the name says, consumers consume. Duh. Okay, they get their energy from eating other organisms in a lot of different ways. And another name for a consumer is heterotroph. Heterotroph means other feeder. So how many different types of consumers are there? There's several different types of consumers or heterotrophs. So let's take a spin around the heterotrophic world and see what kinds of heterotrophs there are. You're probably familiar with some of them, maybe not all of them, unless you had a really, really good teacher last year. So this guy, what is he? What's he eating? Well, he's a little beetle and he's eating this leaf. You can tell by all the bite marks taken out of the leaf there. He is an herbivore. Herbivore means plant consumer. Herbs are plants. Okay? Vor means to consume. And if you're taking Latin or you take Latin, you'll learn that. What about this guy? What does a spider eat? Well, a spider eats other insects. Okay? Those aren't plants. That's actually meat. Okay? We don't think of insects as meat, but the spider sure does. So the spider is an example of a carnivore. Carnivore is a meat consumer. There's a lot of meat consumers. Tigers, dogs, cats, snakes, tarantulas. How about this guy? He's pretty ugly. It's a face only a mother could love there. He's a special type of carnivore, okay? And he's got a bald head for a reason, okay? He is what we call a scavenger. And scavenger, as I said, is a special type of carnivore. He eats animal material, but he eats animal material that's already dead. And that's why he's got the bald head. So that all that gross stuff that's inside that he's sticking his head in doesn't get his feathers all dirty. And that's an adaptation. We'll talk about that later on in the year. Now, some people will eat anything. So the guys that eat just about anything, plant and animal, both are called omnivores, just like this bear here. And bears are omnivores. They eat plant material and they eat animal material. Raccoons are omnivores. Humans are omnivores. There's a lot of omnivores in the world, and that's probably one that you're pretty familiar with. So we see the cute little roly-poly bug here. Where do I find these guys? Well, if you think about it, you typically find them like under logs and where there's like piles of leaves and stuff like that. They are what we call detritivores. They eat detritus. Detritus is dead and decaying leaves and logs and dead and decaying plant material. Sometimes the word detritus is used in literature to describe like a really, really messy room, that there's a lot of detritus or a lot of trash in the room. So detritivores eat the dead and decaying stuff. But then lastly, we have this group called the decomposers. They're a little bit, actually they're a lot different than the detritivores. The decomposers are bacteria and fungi, or fungi, however you want to say it, but they will eat and consume dead plant and animal material, but they return those chemicals back into the soil. So they break things down into chemicals that the plants can use to grow again. So without the decomposers, we would not have that recycling that takes place. If you have a compost pile in your backyard, your compost pile composts because of decomposers. Okay, the detritivores just take some of the big stuff and break it down even littler, but the decomposers break it down altogether. So there you have all of our different types of heterotrophs or consumers. The herbivores, the carnivores, a special kind of carnivore called a scavenger, the omnivore, detritivore, and the decomposer. So that's all there is now for energy producers and consumers. That's a pretty short section, really. In the next one, we're going to talk about the flow of energy. So what do you do now? Well, you got your notes done, so you need to get with a study buddy and come up with at least 6 questions that you think I might ask on a quiz or a test. Remember, 3 level 1s, 2 level 2s, and 1 level 3 question. Also, don't forget the summary at the end of your notes. Okay? Carry on, my wayward son. Talk to you later. We'll see you in class, guys. Bye.